We're from North Dakota, where 12,000 workers bring electricity to 2 million customers and provide over $5 billion in economic activity to the state, while reclaiming 22,000 acres of land. This is coal country.
Find out more at lignite.com/podcast. The voice for North Dakota coal.
Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? You know, Chad, I'm still kind of buzzing from our show at the Blue Rider in Minot. Like that was so much fun. The video of Dakota Faye performing turned out so good. By the way, it's on our YouTube channel. You go to plaintalknd.com to check that out, or just search for Plain Talk on YouTube. You'll find us. You can see obviously our interview with him in the full episode. We've got his musical performance pulled out. That just came together fantastically. And by the way, once again, credit to our producer, Matt Fern, and all the people on his crew helping him out, helping us make that look good. That was a fun episode to do. I really had a lot of fun.
Yeah, and thanks for Terry, the owner of Blue Rider, for inviting us up there, though. It was super cool. It was a cool venue. It was a small venue, so we knew we didn't want to invite thousands of people to come in. But I thought it worked out great. I mean, I love that we could look at people in the eye as we were having these conversations to know how it was landing with the group. And they sold out of Oban 1 Kenobi shots, which comes as no surprise to anyone.
Yeah.
I still don't know what those were, by the way, Rob. Did you ever figure? I heard they might just have been blue Gatorade.
That might have been. The Peacock Alley is so great when they host us too, but they have us up in the balcony, so you feel a little disconnected from the crowd.
It's different, but both are cool.
Both are so cool, so much fun. We really had a lot of fun. Once again, check that out on our YouTube page if you want to see it, or on our Facebook page. It's there as well. So on today's episode, it was Chad's idea that he and his boss, Nick Archuleta from North Dakota United, should come on and tag team me on teacher pay. So I'm going to be a little outnumbered on this one. I shouldn't say that because it's a complicated issue, but my employers at the Fargo Forum had an editorial, which I don't think is very far off the mark. The headline is, North Dakota is failing teachers and it's time to do something about it. They write, I quote, "People don't pursue a teaching career in the hopes of getting rich. While the profession offers many rewards, excellent pay is typically not among them. That said, we should not resign ourselves to the assumption that competitive pay doesn't matter when it comes to attracting people to teach or retaining the best teachers." Now, the editorial was in the context of a National Education Association annual report of teacher pay by state. And there's some statistics, again, from the editorial. Last year, North Dakota teachers earned an average salary of $58,581. The average annual starting salary was $43,734. Average teacher pay has climbed in North Dakota by nearly 7% since 2020-2021, the 2020-2021 school year, when the state ranked 34th in the nation, but that hasn't kept pace with national growth of around 10% over the same period. Last year alone, average salaries in North Dakota grew by 3.2% compared to 3.8% nationwide. Salaries for starting teachers in North Dakota have also dropped from 26th nationwide in 2021-2022 to 34th last year. Meanwhile, the average teacher salary in Minnesota is $72,430, or about $14,000 more than in North Dakota. That puts Minnesota 15th in teacher pay nationwide. Nick, those numbers, it's a little complicated because on one hand, we have been increasing teacher pay in North Dakota. It's up 7%. I mean, it's not nothing. I mean, the taxpayers to that point have been pretty generous, but it's not keeping pace nationally. So what's going on nationally? I mean, why is this happening?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that are happening. First of all, we're not increasing salaries very quickly. And the second thing that's happening is we're seeing other states, I'm thinking now Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, New Mexico, in particular, that have done things that actually raise salaries faster. And so whereas we are gaining at a very slow rate, these other states have taken some more serious and pronounced steps to increase teacher salaries because, Rob, they're suffering from the same thing North Dakota is. We have an acute teacher shortage in North Dakota. And frankly, it's gotten to the point, and this is particularly true in rural areas, but also in our larger areas, where we're depending more and more on foreign-based teachers, particularly from the Philippines here in North Dakota. So, this is a pronounced issue, and it has been for some time.
Nick, when I was in college, I remember North Dakota was consistently 49, 50th, 51st when you consider DC, and we got as high as 26th in the nation in 2016, 2017. So there was some growth here. The fear now is that we seem to be free falling a bit in terms of competition with other states. Why should North Dakotans care that other states get paid more? North Dakotans are hiring North Dakota teachers. Why should they care if Minnesota teachers or Montana teachers or Wyoming teachers are making more than them?
Well, they should care because we don't have border walls, right? And teachers, just as they did when I started teaching in 1992, I went to Minnesota in large measure because the salaries that were being offered were quite a lot higher. And we saw that out-migration of young people, and that's nothing that North Dakota wants to return to. We finally gotten to a point in our state, thanks to the energy industry and others industries that have attracted young people to our state, the tech industry in particular too. And we want to maintain that. We want to make sure that the young people are staying here. If we're not going to be able to attract through salaries and benefits young people who would make wonderful teachers to join our teaching core workforce here in North Dakota, they will go someplace else. And so North Dakotans should all care about that.
I will admit that I've never liked this NEA report very much as a metric because I think kind of I guess the question that Chad asked is I think it's a little unfair because living in Minot, North Dakota versus living in New York City are two very different things in terms of cost of living and everything else. And yet this state ranking compares teachers who live and work in New York City to teachers who live and work in Bismarck or Minot or Candu. And I don't know that that's fair. I feel like there's other things that we should be looking at if we're concerned about teachers, which are retention numbers. And so I don't dispute the idea that we're having trouble recruiting teachers. And so pay's got to be a part of that. I don't dispute any of that. I chafe a little bit when this report comes out and it's like, we're going to shame North Dakota a little bit because we don't stack up to California or some of these other places that frankly living there is those are kind of different worlds economically.
And that's fair. But one thing that this survey also does is it tells the teacher pay gap between similarly educated and experienced people in the working as teachers. How much money would they be making in the private sector? And this particular survey says that for every dollar that somebody in the private sector makes with that similar education and experience, teachers are making 77 cents. So I think in that regard, it does paint a more fair picture. Yeah, you can say what you want about the ranking, and I totally understand that. It's a fair observation, but I think there are other parts of the survey that make it quite valid.
Right, and I think one of the comparing New York to North Dakota, Rob, I think that's completely fair. But I think comparing Grand Forks to East Grand Forks or Moorhead to Fargo is really, really important that if we're trying to recruit those teachers to stay on this side of the river. But Nick, we also know that salary isn't the only variable here, right? I mean, Governor Burgum put together a task force on recruitment and retention because he knew it was a big issue. I will tell you, I was a little disappointed in the outcome because I think going into that thing, they said, hey, we want to figure out how to recruit and retain teachers without spending money. And we know that stuff costs money. But what are those other things beyond teacher salaries or benefit packages that districts and the state can be doing right now that maybe doesn't cost as much money to make people want to stay in this profession?
Well, one of the things that we could do, Chad, and you and I have had conversation about this, and I know that you and Rob have discussed this before too, is we need to tone down the rhetoric surrounding K-12 education. It just seems to me that particularly during COVID, when we started talking about whether or not students should be vaccinated before they come back to school, and then all the culture war stuff about critical race theory, which wasn't being taught in K-12 education in North Dakota, but you'd never know that listening to the rhetoric and frankly, some legislators, all this woke nonsense that was been out there. All of that has a cumulative effect of driving down the desire for young people to want to join this profession. I mean, everybody that I know that has gone into education goes into it because they want to make sure that every child has the best educational outcomes that they can possibly have. They don't go into it to be part of a political scrum, and they shouldn't. That's exactly the wrong reason to get into education. So we could do that. We could tone down the rhetoric. Another thing we can do is, like in New Mexico, they're providing free childcare to every New Mexican citizen who up to 400% of the poverty level. And so that keeps an awful lot of money in the pockets of folks. And there were some families there that were spending 80% of their income on childcare. So that adds to the quality of their life and their financial stability as well. But there are all kinds of different things like that we can be doing and should be investigating, frankly.
It's an interesting question, and I worry sometimes that because pay is one variable to Chad's point, and I think bringing up some of the political, the fraught political environment at times that's come around our public schools. I think some of it is we could back off using our schools sometimes as instruments to impose certain political agenda is a strong word, but it seems like when we want to try to accomplish something, it's like we put it on the backs of teachers. Even to the point where we were talking about the cell phone situation, which I think Governor Armstrong's initiative there, and obviously the legislators who sponsored the legislation as well, I think it's going to prove very popular. But I worry a little bit about the premise, which is that we know that we have a society that is increasingly, not just kids, but is increasingly too dependent on these phones. And so now we've created that the battle space for fixing that problem is our schools. And I'm looking at this thinking, no, it should be at home. Like, I don't know. I feel like we're treating our teachers like they should be parenting the kids sometimes. And I think that becomes a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it's like we're encouraging parents to go to blame the teachers and the educators when their kids are having behavioral problems or other issues. And then it also encourages the schools and teachers to try to be those parents, which they should not be. That's out of their lane. So I feel like that is I realize you came on to talk about teacher pay, but I look at that seems very central to this problem. I wouldn't want, my wife's a teacher, by the way. I suppose I should disclose that. So if we're talking about teacher pay, the Port household potentially may enjoy some has a pecuniary interest there. But
Port wants all the teacher pay increase to be just in Minot, just in the Magic City.
Just music teachers in the Minot public school system would be
Perfect.
Targeted relief.
You have to start somewhere.
No, but I feel like we've created a real problem by the way we treat and it's coming from both sides. We got to stop. We really got to get schools back to basics.
Yeah, you're not necessarily wrong on any of that, Rob. But what is true is that every single societal issue that happens ends up in our schoolhouse. So if you have parents who are frankly not, let's just say that they didn't have a good experience in school, it makes it all more difficult for their children to have one as well. So we want to make sure that as a society that we kind of keep our eye on the ball. I don't know that we do anything more important as a society than educating our own future. And I think we need to keep our eye on that ball. Yes, go to the basics, teach good critical thinking skills, but open up their minds to different things that they would not normally have access to. And that's when I was a kid, and this was before the digital age, going to a library or having a bookmobile come by Newtown, North Dakota was just a big deal, right? And so I don't know. You're right. We do have to get back to basics, but we can't take our eye off the future either.
Nick, so as we've alluded to, these rankings come out every year, and I'm more interested in the trends than I am in just one year compared to the previous year, and we are going in the wrong direction. I do think we're probably going to continue to go in the wrong direction after this legislative session, only funding a 2.5% increase, which is lower than cost of inflation in the country. When you're out talking to teachers post-legislative session, how are they feeling? I mean, you talk some about the political rhetoric. I can't help but think about Keith Kempenek during the session talking about how public schools are doing nothing but indoctrinating kids, and said it like it was fact, like everybody should just agree. So how are teachers feeling post-session? I also understand it's May 14th, so most teachers are probably feeling some stress at the end of the school year as well that goes along with that. But how are teachers feeling?
Well, frankly, when I've written a column for our local publication that we send out to our members, talking about the wins that we had in the legislature, they look at it like a lot of Americans look at it. What is the bottom line for them? How is this going to affect their pocketbook? And frankly, when you take a look at over the course of the last 10 years, teacher salaries have really only gone up, adjusted for inflation, by 1.68% or something on that order. It's disappointing to them, but they were hoping that they would see more. The interim of education funding committee was told that getting to a 4% increase for each year of the next biennium shouldn't be a problem because of the just hold the general fund contribution the same. There would be more money coming from the Common Schools Trust Fund, and then monies that were turned back. 4 and 4 was very doable, and as the sessions began, we knew that their goal was 3 and 3. We were told by appropriators, and for it to come out as 2.5 and 2.5, it was a little disappointing for teachers, to be quite honest with you. And you're right; they are the end of the year is a stressful time for them, so they may not have taken all the time they need to delve into the big picture here.
I wonder if there's something that needs to be done, because it seems like a lot of times as with so many issues, our impressions, or I should say maybe the general public's impressions of our schools, are filtered through national political dialogue or rhetoric or whatever you want to call it, where we watch Fox News and or MSNBC, as the case may be, and maybe they're highlighting some controversy somewhere over schools and Florida or West Virginia or something like that. And maybe those are concerning stories, but we have this tendency to pick these, well, this is happening in Florida and here, so therefore it must be happening in North Dakota. Therefore, our public schools are terrible. We talk about these things monolithically, and I have some skin in the game with this. When people talk about the media, right, and they lump us all in together, like I'm getting the same memos that the people at Fox News are or something. I don't have anything to do with them. We're completely separate from them. But we do have a tendency as a society to look at these things monolithically. So when some of those lawmakers, like Representative Kempenek, are talking about public schools, I have a feeling that if you asked him for specifics, he would probably offer things that didn't happen in North Dakota.
Yeah, and we've seen that before. Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's a problem. And I don't know. I mean, is there a way that public education advocates, whether it's you folks representing the teachers or the school boards or what have you, can get around some of that and say, let's stay focused on what's happening in North Dakota?
Absolutely, there's a way, and I talked with teachers about this all the time. Is we are horrible at telling our success stories, and it's almost to the point where I want to pull my hair out. I go to Cannonball School here a couple of weeks ago. I walk in with 4 other adults with these little kids in second and third grade. We're there at their school. They don't get this many visitors at one time. We walked in there. Those kids, all of them, looked at us for about 1.5 seconds, and then it was eyes focused on the teacher, where she was teaching them sentence structure, how to compose sentences. And the work that's going on in that school, why aren't they shouting that out from the rooftops? I mean, it is incredible work that they're doing there. And that's a story that's repeated over and over in community after community across the state. And we have to do a better job doing that. There is a group called North Dakotans for Public Schools that is formed. And I think that group is going to do a good job of getting that narrative out there. Because so much of the time, you're right, Rob, when we have legislators that are bemoaning the horrible state of education, they might be talking about Florida. They might be talking about North Carolina. But they're not talking about our areas here in North Dakota. And mathematics excellence on the NAEPS tests that come out that people put a lot of faith in. 8th graders are second in the nation in mathematics. 4th graders are third in the nation in mathematics. We're doing some good work in this state. We have to make sure that we keep going. But we also have to, I mentioned before about society's problems ending up in our classrooms. You know where they do great on NAEP tests? In those schools that are on military bases. And part of the reason is those kids don't worry about where their next meal is coming from. Those kids don't worry about their parents losing their job. Those kids don't worry about health insurance or getting sick. And they don't worry about food insecurity. So we should be more like that. We should be more like that and start taking care of some of these societal problems so they don't end up in our classrooms. We'll see student attainment rise, I would guarantee it.
One of the reasons I don't like this annual report that comes out from the NEA, because I think you're right. You know, I think for the most in the public, for most people in the public, I think that they hear this report, like you said, you're not doing a great job, or public schools aren't doing a great job talking about the wins. And so for the average member of the public, when they hear about teachers and that, it's usually in the context of teacher pay. And then it's usually like, hey, you dumb rubes, you're not paying as much as Minnesota is. What's wrong with you? Is kind of the message. I mean, sometimes and I don't think that's necessarily fair or what's trying to be communicated. But I'll be honest, sometimes when I read this report, that's how I take it, is like, you're shaming me because I'm not paying enough. And this is the only thing I've really heard about teachers. It'd be nice if there was some context, like, look at our scores, look at this innovative stuff that we're doing at these different schools. And oh, by the way, you know, we could probably do a better job of keeping up with teacher pay. I feel like that would be a better message.
I agree with you 100%, Rob. We do have to just get better at controlling the narrative and telling the truth about public education in North Dakota, because it is fantastic. You take a look at some of these academies, like the Career Center here in Bismarck, and they have them in other communities as well. The CTE centers that are being built or are already functioning, including the online one. I mean, that is world-class work going on. That's educating a public for the future. And man, oh man, it's powerful. But nobody ever heard about it because we're not telling the story, and we've got to get better at it.
Yeah, I think the other piece of this is elected officials and legislators should get into schools. I mean, they have 2 years during this interim to spend a day. I mean, Rob, you and I bring our kids to school every day. I couldn't imagine spending a full day in my son's 2nd grade class and not losing even more hair, right? I mean, there's some special people handling 22 kids in a classroom and doing incredible work. And so I think legislators need to get in there and spend a day with an administrator, with a teacher, with a lunch person working in the lunchroom.
Well, we do that with the coal industry, the oil industry, the farm industry. I mean, the business community, they're always bringing lawmakers out. Those are valuable meetings.
Yeah.
The schools, I guess I don't know.
I guess what I'm saying is, Rob, let's elected officials have to say yes, because I know a lot of them do get invited and then don't say yes when they're invited. So I think that's important. Nick, I want to, again, big picture recruitment and retention. Burgum had this task force. It did fine work. I think it was a little bit rushed, quite frankly. That task force has been disbanded. I mean, it was a one cycle sort of thing. Do you think Governor Armstrong should take another run at recruitment and retention? Because one of the things that I get frustrated by, we often talk about workforce, but very little of the workforce initiatives look at the public sector in terms of K through 12. It's often, we need more people to work in the energy industry or this industry. And this is a real issue that I think needs to be on par with some of these private sector employees.
Yeah, I think when we were booming out in the oil patch, for example, there was an immediate need to start talking about workforce. And that's for sure, because a lot of these folks were coming up here to work in the oil patch. They didn't necessarily all bring their families with them. But now that's a more mature play, and we have more and more people that are, they might not even be in the oil industry anymore, but they decided to stay in North Dakota because this is the best state in the world to live in. And they're absolutely right in that assessment. So now let's start taking a broader look at it. I mean, those needs, those initial workforce needs, they still exist, and we need to be looking at them, and K-12 has a role to play in it, obviously. But now let's start taking a look at our workforce in total. I think that there are other industries that have come in here, in part because the oil industry led the way. But if you take a look at our tech sector, that's growing. Our unmanned vehicles, that's growing. And the stuff that they're doing up in Grand Forks with flight, that's incredible. So let's start looking at what it's going to take to make sure that we have a workforce in North Dakota that's educated by North Dakota educators.
Nick, can I ask one other question while I'm jumping in for back-to-back here? I mean, we are talking about teachers getting paid 40th, which is low. We talk about some of the issues with the legislature and those kind of things. But what's your pitch to somebody who's listening to this, who's maybe a sophomore in college trying to figure it out, or somebody who's maybe in their 6th year or 4th year of teaching, why this profession is worth it?
Well, I would fall back on, I think, stories. I mean, when I was a teacher, it was the most rewarding job I ever had. And I didn't start teaching until I was in my early 30s. I had worked for a company called Cominco American for a while, loading anhydrous ammonia into tank cars, or taking it off tank cars and then loading it onto trucks. It was great work, and I got to work for that company, learned a lot. But when you're in teaching, you don't always see the immediate result of your good work. Sometimes it takes a while for it to kick in, but you're making a difference in a child's life. And the sooner you do that, the better off they're going to be, and the better off you're going to be. It is such a rewarding field to get into. No, it's not financially rewarding. You're not going to become a millionaire becoming a teacher, but you're going to make a difference in so many lives that it's just unbelievable. I don't know. You have to have a passion for it, and we do know that people that go into education have the same sort of assets, shall we say, that they're looking for in industry. And yes, they can make more money in private sector, probably a little less pressure, but we need you in education. We need you to come in and make a difference in the lives of children.
It's kind of like being a journalist. You're never going to be rich, but at least a lot of people will hate you.
So there's that.
There is that. By the way, I should mention, Nick mentioned North Dakota for Public Schools. They actually have sponsored a couple episodes in the past. Our sponsors have no bearing on what we cover on the podcast or not, but just thought I'd disclose that since it's there. And obviously anybody who listened to that episode knows they sponsored it, because that's how the sponsorships work. Nick, thank you so much for coming on. Anything else about this subject matter? I mean, it's an ongoing debate, how much we spend on our schools, but we had plenty of money this session, I think, to probably do a little bit better with teacher pay. But I would really like to see us drill down. Let's talk about some of the successes, because I'm a big fan of Minot Public Schools. Obviously that's the school system that I'm most familiar with, because I still have kids in the Minot Public School system. I'm a product of the Minot Public School system, and I love it. I think we do a great job. And I think sometimes we only talk about it in the context of when there's problems. Like we need the taxpayers to pony up for a new building, or we need the taxpayers to pony up for more teacher pay. And also, and we're going to have a fight about the books in the library, or somebody thinks that we're putting out kitty litter boxes for the students or something nonsense. The public needs to hear stories from the public schools that aren't those things.
Absolutely. And you know what? If I was to add just one more thing, our legislators are our legislators, whether we're in session or not, and they're getting paid every month. So I would encourage every one of your listeners to make sure that you're in contact with them. Don't wait for those 80 days during every 2 years business. They're your legislator year round. So contact them. Tell them how you feel about your school, your local school, your children's teachers, shall we say, and let them know that it's important and it is a vital part of what we do in this state. In fact, I would argue it's as crucial as any other industry. So let's make sure that we're in contact with those legislators.
I know we're trying to wrap this up, but I want one other thing. Nick, one of the things we heard a lot during the session was sort of the parents' role in their kids' education. And it seems like at times it's almost confrontational, parents versus the school. But from your perspective, again, talking to teachers every day, what do teachers want from parents?
Well, North Dakota has a long history, and there are a lot of communities that don't recognize what this animosity is between teachers and parents because they don't experience it. There isn't a big parents' rights issue in North Dakota. It doesn't exist in most communities, if there exists at all. But I would say that what parents and teachers have done historically is what we should continue to do in the future. And that is put that child at the center of our best intentions, communicate about that child, communicate about that child's future, their strengths, their weaknesses, and what can be done about it. And then you don't have that issue. Parents want to be communicated with, and teachers want parents to come see the great work that they're doing. I mean, it's as easy as that.
But to a point I made earlier, I think the genesis of some of that tension too, though, is us trying to use the schools to solve some of these societal problems. And I think the degree to which we could pull some of that out and de-emphasize it, remove some of the tension, because I think it invites teachers to try to be the parents. I think it maybe offends some. I will admit that there have been times where I have gotten like beginning of the school messages and I'm getting, make sure your child is eating a healthy meal every day and make sure to hug your child every day. And it's like, it made me upset because it's like, that is so, I don't know, condescending. Like, you think I'm not feeding my child? You think I'm not hugging my child? Why don't you back off and worry about math a little bit? That was my reaction. And I think that we, because we're inviting it, like there's, the interplay between parents, I don't know that it's ever not going to be a little bit fraught because those are our kids and the teachers care a lot and we care a lot. And it's going to be hard sometimes, but I think we invite, I think we're asked, sometimes I think we're just asking too much of our schools.
That's true.
You just let some of it go. And teachers are in a no-win situation because if they do less, they get blamed. If they do more, they get blamed. And it's just really hard.
It sounds like you could use a hug.
Yeah, maybe. All right. We're going to let you go. Nick, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Bye-bye.
We're from North Dakota, where 12,000 workers bring electricity to 2 million customers and provide over $5 billion in economic activity to the state, while reclaiming 22,000 acres of land. This is coal country.
Find out more at lignite.com/podcast. The voice for North Dakota coal.
Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. Great interview with Nick Archuleta, and I'm sympathetic to how complex. My only complaint about the state ranking is it's just not very nuanced. And
right. And again, I think that looking at this from like a regional, maybe it's a regional ranking or comparison or neighboring states, because I think that's
never going to pay as much as New York. We're never going to pay as much as California. We just aren't.
We're likely not going to pay as much as Minneapolis. So is western Minnesota, South Dakota, Montana,
Wyoming.
Yeah, I think that's what you want to be looking at. And again, I think that the things that I look at most in these things is the trend line, if we're going down, because I think that does sort of send a message. And again, we went from 49 50th up to 26 within the last 10 years, and now we're sort of heading in the wrong direction. Also, I mean, we also know that recruitment and retention of employees is a very, very complicated thing. Salary has to be part of that conversation. Total compensation has to be part of that, but it's not the only thing, right? Because if the private sector is paying more and the jobs are easier or has more flexibility, there's so many different things. Teaching is a hard job, and you need to make sure that we are providing the good work environment, those kind of things.
I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but we make it harder when we expect teachers to parent, and we shouldn't. I think that engenders resentment from the actual parents, and it makes the teachers' jobs harder. We need to, like as a society, recalibrate some of our expectations on that front.
Yeah, I mean, not only parent, but also be the psychiatrist, the psychologist, the counselor, all these different things that, like a public school teacher can't ignore those things because those students are coming in, and they have to do their part. But I do think the storytelling of public schools is very important to sort of balance out the negative stuff, because there often is a vacuum of just people with their conspiracies online. I think that's very important. And I also think schools need to do a better job of welcoming people in to the building. I mean, I've told this story many times after bringing Evan to daycare and pre-K, where I got to go into the classroom and I talked to all the kids, whatever. And then day 2 at his elementary school, like, I'm being met at the door and being told I can't come in, right, for safety reasons. But that is a little bit jarring, because then you're a parent, you're looking around the corner, what's going on in there? So I think figuring out ways to welcome the community in to see the great things that are happening, it's all part of the big picture here.
I agree. We have some feedback on the Blue Rider thing, and we did some of the feedback we got online. People were disappointed that they didn't know about the event ahead of time. That was our decision. This wasn't a town hall scheduled by the Congresswoman. It was never our intent to take, questions from the audience or host. We were hosting an interview. We were hosting an episode of Plain Talk. Our guest, Julie Fedorchak. We didn't make a big deal because the Blue Rider is a tiny, tiny venue. We had a bunch of cameras and stuff we needed to set up. We were afraid of packing the place and making it very difficult, if not impossible, to record. Right. So we didn't really advertise it a lot, because our audience is not necessarily the people in the room. Our audience are all the people on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and everywhere else.
And I will just say, how cool was it to be having a local rap hip hop artist, Dakota Faye, performing, having our Congresswoman in the Blue Rider bar in Minot, North Dakota. That was just super, super cool. And I'm glad that Congresswoman Fedorchak was available to do it, because it ended up being a really, really great show. And any negativity towards it, if you want Fedorchak to have a town hall, she should have a town hall. But it's not like we played patty cake with her. We asked her tough questions and she answered them.
We asked her tough questions. She answered the tough questions. It was a respectful conversation. The people, most of the comments I saw, people were interested in her answers. A lot of people didn't like her answers. Some people liked her answers. But that's what it is. We asked hard questions, direct questions. She answered the questions. Whether you like the answers or not, it's up to you. But I thought it was a really good interview and a good event, and I'm glad we did.
I also got some
feedback too, which is really.
And I also got some feedback that we should have went harder at her after she answered some of the questions. Again, this isn't a debate about, we laid out questions, we pushed back at different times on her answers, but it's not like we were there to have a 30-minute debate over Medicaid cuts or slowing down of spending, right? I mean, and the intricate details of that.
I don't want to make it sound like we got a lot of criticism, because we didn't. I think we're in a really, there's a lot of big feelings right now about what's happening in Washington, D.C., and I understand that. But, if you're expecting, the cable news shout fest, you're coming to the wrong show, because we don't do that.
And I think it also shows the one of the things that I often talk about is a frustration of mine, how everybody's focused on Washington and nobody's focused on the state. We had conversations with Kelly Armstrong several times over the last several months and didn't get the same level of, wow, he was full of it, or, you should have pushed him harder on this. It's so raw at the federal level that, and maybe it's because they're not doing the town halls in person, but it just felt like.
I think it's Trump. I mean, he just makes his own gravity. I mean, he is so polarizing, and anybody. And I think it's really hard when he does things that are. I'm frustrated with Congresswoman. I'm frustrated with our entire delegation. I'm frustrated with most of the Republican Party right now that can't seem to find their way. I was just, Senator Kramer about the whole luxury jumbo jet that Qatar wants to give President Trump. And, Senator Kramer's on the Jay Thomas show saying, oh, what's unconstitutional about that? We had France gave us the Statue of Liberty. And it's like, yeah, if you go back in 1877, Congress authorized the President of the United States to receive the Statue of Liberty. Also, the Statue of Liberty was for the whole country.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like the president was going to live there, right?
Yeah.
It's not like the president gets to own it. And that's anyway. I'm just disappointed in just a complete, and Democrats do this too, just a complete inability to hold President Trump to the standard that you held President Biden.
And I will also just say, again, I didn't like a lot of Julie Fedorchak's answers, but she was there and she answered the questions. She let people know where she stands on this stuff. That's all we can ask for. I mean, if you want your congressional delegation to agree with you on everything, you're going to be very disappointed.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, if you don't like her answers, then vote accordingly, I guess. Her answers are her answers. All right. We had a Spotify comment. And by the way, remember, you can always leave us voicemail, send us comments, 701-587-3141. Obviously, we get so much on social media. If you really want something to make the show, the phone number, text or call, 701-587-3141. That's the best way. But we did have the Spotify comment that I thought was interesting. The commenter quotes Congresswoman Fedorchak saying, well, I wasn't elected president, so that's up to him. And basically, she said that in a couple of our interviews now where, it's like, I'm not, I'm one member of Congress. He's the president. The people voted for him. He gets to do these things. She's not wrong about this. But the commenter continued. He goes, that's the fundamental issue. Article 1 gives power of the purse to Congress, saying, among other things, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. This was later clarified in 1974 with the Impoundment Control Act, which in sections 1012, 1013, and 1017 gives the process for the president to ask Congress to delay or rescind funds, but Congress is under no obligation to cut these funds. I mean, there's a food fight between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And that is one argument is even members of Congress who like what President Trump is doing, who agree with his agenda, I think you have to stand up for the institution. And I think that's a little frustrating. And maybe I think that's the criticism of Congresswoman Fedorchak that the commenter's intending is you're a separate equal, even setting aside ideology and party affiliation, you should be standing up for Congress as a separate and co-equal branch of government. And I agree with that criticism.
I agree 100% as well. And it's, frankly, you said there's a food fight between the executive and the legislative. Is there? Or is the legislative just taking it and just agreeing with whatever Trump has to do? I mean, again, he's the leader of the country. He's the leader of their party, but that doesn't mean you have to do everything that he wants you to do
right.
or agree to everything.
And what frustrates me is it seems sometimes when Congress is going to, I see that we're going to do another article. We're going to force another vote on articles of impeachment, which I just think.
I read this morning that the Dem leadership has shut that down.
Okay.
That Hakeem
right.
Jeffries and the other leadership has said we're not doing this again.
I just don't think that's helpful right now. And again,
I agree.
I think that Donald Trump is manifestly unfit to be president. But at this point, he's not doing anything. The public knows who he is. The public knew what he promised to do. He's doing those things. This is what they voted for. But I think if Congress is going to push back, it's got to be no, President Trump, if you want to accept a jet from Qatar, Congress has to approve it. It's explicit in the Constitution. If Congress appropriates money, you're obliged to spend that money. And by the way, the cabinet officials showing up before budget meetings in Congress, and they don't have the Department of Homeland Security head Kristi Noem, the head of the FBI Kash Patel, among others, have shown up, and they don't have their budgets in line at all. That is a valid vector after which to go. They're required by law. And there's nothing more fundamental to Congress's job than to write budgets and appropriate. So,
and we need the majority in both chambers to push on them a little bit and not just accept and defend the levels of incompetence. I will say one thing about Democrats. If they decide to move with impeachment again, they've absolutely learned nothing. They've impeached this guy twice, Rob. And where has it gotten them? It's gotten them after. All it's gotten is Trump impeached twice, and then people like Kelly Armstrong moving letters of impeachment against Joe Biden, And I mean, it doesn't accomplish anything. Democrats can win on the issues right now nationally if they can just focus on what people care about. I'm not 100% positive they have the ability to do that, but national Democrats have an opportunity here because of how Trump is behaving and because of, I mean, we talked about it with Fedorchak. No, I think you said to call him earlier something about slaughtering sacred cows. When you start slaughtering sacred cows, there's really good political opportunity for the other party.
Okay.
Don't screw it up, Democrats.
Yeah, and I don't have no political interest at all in Democrats winning elections.
Of course you don't.
I just want at this point I just want government to function the way it's designed. And I don't want these cabinet officials to get away with not bringing budgets to Congress, because if you let Trump get away with it, then a Democratic president's going to do the same thing.
Right.
You know, I want standards, I want a process, and I want us all to stick to it. That's my interest.
And I don't want to hear but Biden anymore, and I don't want to hear Democrats saying but Trump. Let's just focus. Let's focus on holding our own guys to a certain standard.
Republicans, you said that Joe Biden was the worst president in the history of the world. I think that might be a little bit of hyperbole, but I'll agree he wasn't a good president from my perspective. But if that's your standard by which you're going to measure the actions of Donald Trump, you're doing it wrong.
He can be the worst president ever, and then you use him to justify the behaviors of your guy.
Exactly. All right. Let's speaking of this sort of food fight, this is going to be, and granted, we are at the very, very beginning. We got so long, we're at the beginning of the 2-year election cycle. But this is going to be a very interesting cycle because while the legislature was in session, all of the local districts have been reorganizing. And this is per state law. So Republicans have been doing this, Democrats have been doing this, but the Republicans are a lot more interesting because there's a civil war in the party. And there was a situation in District 25 where they held but May 15th, by the way, is the deadline for when these reorgs have to be done. And when I say a reorg, for those of you who don't understand how this works, essentially the parties have local districts. Those, but they're legislative districts. And each of those districts has a party apparatus. By law, they have to have one. Because they have duties that are set out in laws. For instance, if a legislator vacates a seat, a lot of times it's the local party that appoints the replacement. So, and also if you win the local party's nomination, you get ballot access. You get to go straight on the ballot. You don't have to gather signatures. So they held in District 25, they held 2 reorganization sessions. According to NDGOP Chairwoman Sandy Sanford, neither of them are valid. The first one, they used proxy voting, which District 25 has been doing for a long time. It's always been a little dubious. This time they really got out of hand. They had like one person carrying 20 proxy votes for people who weren't at the meeting. I think that's a little ridiculous. It's one thing if it's somebody who just couldn't make the meeting, but I mean, it got a little ridiculous. So they threw that meeting out, or they held another meeting on May 10th. This meeting also was invalid because they didn't satisfy the state's notification laws. Now they have two elected chairs, and there may be a legal battle over this. And zooming out from District 25 a little bit, the party has a problem in that, it's in state law where the party, the NDGOP or the Democratic Party, as the case may be, is not allowed to tell or to set rules for these local districts and how they do it. So you go from district to district. Each district has different rules. A lot of times they hide the rules from people. They try to hide the meetings to stop people from coming. This entire process in the North Dakota Republican Party specifically has become so corrupted, Chad, that I don't know anybody. I think that the next state party convention, I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know how many people are even going to show up because this is completely off. And they are so off the rails. It's remarkable. It's remarkable.
You know who's going to show up? It's going to be the people who have endless amounts of time on their hand to mess with these things. I still can't wrap my head around why state law dictates how a private organization runs or doesn't run. I mean, why the state law dictates to either state party in terms of what rules their district parties, or I mean, almost their subsidiaries can have.
I think it started where the state said, okay, we're going to give ballot access to these parties. And so we're going to say that their nominees get to go on the ballot. But if we're going to say that, then we're going to set some rules for the process for selecting.
And one of the rules is they can't have this. No,
that was added in later. That was a Jim Casper amendment to a bill about a decade ago. That's now, there was never really a problem with this because I think everybody just thought, yeah, of course we should have a transparent process. But now you have this civil war in the party. So now everybody's playing games where it's like, you don't get to know what the rules are and we're going to trip you up. And they're actually, I mean, I'm hearing from district chairs, volunteer people, right? I mean, if you're the chairman of a local party, you're not making any money doing this. You're not getting paid. There's no glory in it. So you're showing up trying to run one of these meetings, and people are showing up and recording everything because they want to find some little rule thing. So if the wrong person wins, they could challenge the meeting and throw it out. And I'm thinking to myself, like, why would anybody want to get involved in this process? Like in the short term, maybe this is okay and people are going to show up. But in the long term, as you're trying to bring in new generations of activists and participants, why would anybody get involved in a process that is just fundamentally corrupt and compromised?
Yeah, I mean, why would anybody want to show up and see a fight about Robert's rules? I mean, it's ridiculous. If I was the GOP, I mean, let's talk specifically about District 25. That's a purple district, right? This isn't one of the deep red districts. This is a district that has one Democrat and Alyssa Mitzcog and two Republicans and Cynthia Schreiber-Beck and Larry Lueck. By and large, sort of moderate. Certainly the two House members are seen as moderates. And you've got this food fight going on. And at some point, these legislators have to ask themselves if they want to be part of this process. And secondly, does it give an opportunity for Democrats to win all three of these seats because they're going to be seen as the local party of rationale? Because, I mean, these are community events, right? And so community members know if so-and-so is sort of a rabble-rouser, not part of the community, is the district chair and sort of messing with the Republicans. I don't know if that's what I want to be associated with. So I think there's a chance with the stuff going on in Washington, with this civil war, that you might see some Democratic seats picked up in the eastern part of the state in 2 years if the Republicans don't figure this stuff out. And again, you're not suggesting you want one side or the other side to win. You're crazy enough to think that we should just have the same set of rules and everybody should know what those rules are. It seems pretty simple.
It's weird because it's such a fundamental thing in our society. It goes back to the Code of Hammurabi. I mean, why do we write the rules down in the first place? So that people can know who they are, what they are, right? We have a process for establishing what the rules are, and then we write the rules down, and then everybody gets to know what the rules are. Otherwise, you just have a monarch in charge who's just going to decide what the rules are in any given moment. And that doesn't serve anybody well. It's fundamentally un-American.
It reminds me of my 8-year-old son and his friends playing wiffle ball in the front yard. And depending on who's hitting or who's pitching, they can't agree on the rules, depending on what the play is and who's in charge. It's like anything. If you don't, you have to know what the rules are. And then if you win, you win. I mean, could you imagine if the legislature just haphazardly, like I suppose the Senate does have slightly different rules than the House, but they all know them going in. So it seems like no way to run a big organization like the North Dakota GOP. And then the state party's just stuck having to deal with the outcomes at these things.
Right. Well, and the thing is, the outcome is local districts dictate who runs the state party because all the district chairs run the state committee. I think you're going to see the Republican Party that's going to be a minority faction in the Republican Party is going to control the party.
When is the state party reorg?
June, I believe.
Okay. And do we know if there's multiple candidates running for chair, or is Sandy the only one running?
I don't think I shouldn't say. I don't know.
Okay.
It's very much. I don't think Sanford's running again.
Oh, really?
I don't think so. But
okay.
Maybe I'm wrong about that. The last time I talked to her, she sounded uncertain. So and we didn't get into it. We were really talking about District 25. But the thing is, they elect. So the NDGOP is run by the state committee. State committee is made up of the district chairs. And at this point, if it's going to be run, for instance, if you're Julie Fedorchak, you saw what happened to her at the last state convention, where basically they goofed around. Or you think of somebody like House Majority Leader Mike LaFleur, where the first, I don't know, what was it, 3.5 hours of the last state convention was spent trying to expel the delegates from his district. I mean, if you're some of these statewide, or you look at Kirsten Baszler, who, is obviously she runs for a nonpartisan position, but she's a Republican and she's always sought the Republican endorsement. Why would statewide leaders like that show up at a state convention when the primary process is right there? I think we're going to see something in Georgia. Brian Kemp basically started his own shadow party, and that's kind of calling it a shadow party makes it sound. I mean, it was right out in the open. It wasn't like there was anything hidden about it, but where they just backed their own candidates and just sort of ignored what the party's doing. And I think that's what's going to happen in North Dakota. You're going to see a lot of legislative candidates, probably even some statewide candidates, that just don't participate in the party process at all. Like the official party endorsing conventions and everything are going to be over here, and they're going to endorse candidates, but it's really going to be decided at the June primary. And that whole process is just going to become irrelevant. And I understand why it's becoming irrelevant, because again, it has been corrupted.
Right. No, I agree 100%. And maybe it's better this way. Maybe the more people who are voting on the nominee is better, rather than, because I mean, I've talked to Republicans who've talked about recruiting candidates, and they're basically saying, I can't win the convention. If I don't win the convention, I don't want to go to the primary because there's no support. Well, this way, if there is this Brian Kemp type shadow organization, you can recruit people who would then feel comfortable saying, forget the convention. I don't have to go and get yelled at for 3.5 hours. Or, I think about my home Republican convention 2 years ago when Sean Cleary and Ryan Eckroth went at it, and the chair, I think it was Karen Carls, was trying to run this basically mob scene, trying to determine who's the nominee. Who wants to go through that? Ultimately, they went to the primary. The better candidate won, and Sean Cleary. Maybe we just skip the one crazy night and just go forward with the primary.
Yeah, and I think we're better served by candidates who are chosen because they made the best case to a broad swath of the voters, not who was able to pack the room with a bunch of bullies one night who screamed and shouted until they got their way.
Well, the only concern I would have is that if I'm the GOP is people crossing over, right? I mean, you might end up with a bunch of Dems voting, and it's probably better because it'd probably end up with a more moderate candidate in most places. But I mean, you are choosing a Republican candidate. Do you want that sliver of Democrats coming over? And I mean, nobody, the vote turnout in primaries are very low. So if you do have 100 Dems that come over, it can. I mean, I think I've said on this podcast, I can't remember the last time I voted in a Democrat primary.
Some of these legislative districts might not have 100 Dems to cross over.
I guarantee there's 100 Dems.
Well, that are going to turn up. It depends on where we're talking about, which district. I mean, some it's probably fine. Some you probably have a point.
Right, 100 Dems who also know anything beyond just I'm a Democrat, right? Because it has to be, if you're trying to influence the Republican primary, you have to be somewhat involved and understanding. So you're probably, that number's not that big, but in a close race.
Democrats have some to fear from that too, because if you start seeing the Democrats playing in the Republican,
right,
they might just stay Republicans. And also, you run the risk of maybe losing, if you lose enough, I mean, some of your candidates may not even make the ballot if they don't even get the minimum number of votes required.
That's right.
So that's a dangerous game for Democrats too. The other thing, we still have some bills pending. I think the statement from the governor's office earlier this week was 10 bills remaining. I think there's going to be at least one big veto coming out of them.
And all 10 bills are budget bills, so he can line item them, or is that just a bunch of?
I think they're all appropriations bills. Most of them appropriations bills at the very. I don't have the list in front of me.
And to clarify, on a budget bill, he can line item veto. On a non-budget bill, he cannot.
Right. So if it's a budget bill, he can line item veto things. That's what the Constitution says. A policy bill can't line item veto.
It's sign or veto.
It's sign or veto. But if it's a budget bill, and the one interesting thing, especially because of our propensity to put policy in budget bills, is I think the really interesting one to watch is going to be the ethics budget. because the lawmakers put some immunity for themselves in there, and I think it's going to get vetoed.
Well, and I think Kelly's smart. He knows how this looks to the public. I mean, it looks really bad beyond just the fact that they shouldn't have immunity. Terrible politics.
Yeah.
That we're above the law.
It really is. And now I should be clear. There's two sections of immunity in there in the Ethics Commission budget. Here, and I should pull up the right version of the budget.
Well, there's one that if you declare your conflict, then you have immunity, right?
Right. There's one that says essentially an individual is immune from prosecution from this section if, at the time an official action was taken, they adhered to legislative conflict of interest rules requiring an individual to disclose a personal or private interest to the member's respective chair. I'm fine with that. Like, you follow the rules and you disclose it, you're not going to get rung up on the idea that you're voting in your own interest.
And I don't recall any time where somebody declared an interest and said, I don't want to vote, where the legislature said, well, you got to vote. They all excuse the vote.
I think the one that's going to be more controversial, and I'm not, this is my impression, but I think Section 5, which creates immunity in affirmative defense. And it says essentially, if they get advice from the ethics, it's kind of more of a blanket immunity. It's much more broad. Section 5, I think that's the one that could get line item vetoed. And part of me wonders too, because, the context for this, and this wasn't part of the Ethics Commission budget, but the context was that very ugly debate that lawmakers had over campaign finance reform at the end of the session, which is, I think that's going to haunt them. I think that debate is going to haunt them. And I shouldn't say that it was the whole legislature, because again, the Senate passed a good bill. Senate passed good reforms unanimously. So every member of the Senate's off the hook on this as far as I'm concerned. It was the House that was just absolutely intransigent on this. And I mean, there's something to be said for what they did that was just, it's not going to sit well with the public. And
Rob, I still can't, I've been thinking about this and I still can't just wrap my head around what they're thinking. Because again, it's not that much work. It's not all that much more transparency. It's sort of easy transparency. The Secretary of State was making it easy on them to be able to do it. What are they afraid of?
Well, and again, there's the very real potential for a lawsuit here. I think that they are violating multiple sections of the state constitution. The ethics amendment to the state constitution gives North Dakotans a right. They have a constitutional right to access campaign finance information. But yet legislators have exempted themselves from having to report expenditures and beginning and ending fund balances. The ethics amendment of the state constitution explicitly prohibits them from spending campaign funds on themselves. But because lawmakers have exempted themselves from having to report expenditures or beginning and ending fund balances, they've made it essentially impossible to detect that. So it's like, we made something a crime, but we've also made it impossible to detect if the crime's been committed.
And again, statewide candidates and PACs already have to do exactly what the legislature has been asked to do.
Only the legislators are exempt. And again, the Senate voted to end that. So they get credit for that.
Yeah.
A minority, not enough to get it through, but some members of the House also. So don't blanket blame all legislators. Go look up how your particular legislators voted on that. But there was enough people who were resistant to that. And I think they have really put their entire chamber in a not just the Republican majority, but also the entire legislative chamber in a terrible position. I think the Ethics Commission could sue over this. I think they could sue over the two things I just mentioned. I think they could sue over the idea that the legislature is frustrating them in their ability to do their jobs, which, by the way, is another provision of the state constitution. I think they could sue over all of those things, and I think they could win.
And let's be clear, let's put a finer point on who those people are in the House. It wasn't the Democrats. No. The Democrats all supported this thing. It was a majority of the Republican caucus who was opposed to the House. in the House. Yep, that's in the House GOP caucus, and often some more senior members. And I will tell you what it looked like to me is the people who are benefiting from the current system don't want to change the system because they keep getting reelected. And so, I could see where they're coming from. Man, let's not change the system. It's working for me. We have a supermajority over here. So why not do it? So kudos to the Senate and the Democrats.
Kind of a mix of longtime lawmakers and shorter term lawmakers, because it was Representative Dan Ruby, who's been there for decades. He was leading the charge against it. Representative Vicky Steiner, she's been there, I don't know if decade, a long time. She was leading the charge against it. But it was also Representative Austin Shower, who at one point became so animated in conference committee about in opposition to this bill that the Senate had to pull their conferees out of the room. He was against it. Representative Steve Vetter, who is in a second term?
No, I bet he's in his third. He's been there for a bit.
Okay. Yeah. Still relatively new compared to Representative Ruby and Steiner, but I just don't understand. It's so completely tone deaf what they're doing. North Dakota has some of the least transparent campaign laws in the country. I mean, we exempt all contributions under $200 from having to be reported. South Dakota's at $100. Minnesota's at like $25 or $30 or something like that. Montana's at the same. Wyoming's at the same.
Well, and a lot of those states cap, right? A lot of those states cap how much an individual or a PAC can give to a candidate. We don't cap that. I mean, if I wanted to write a check for $150,000 to a legislative candidate, I could do that. It would have to be disclosed. But like Montana, I think their biggest, it's like $200 or something like that is the cap.
Yeah, I don't know what the caps are in other states. North Dakota doesn't have a cap.
Right.
To me, the cap's a separate issue. I'm more concerned about reporting everything.
Sure.
I want transparency. And it's, again, they put themselves. So I think in the interim, until we sort of start seeing who the candidates are, who's going to run for what later this year, months from now, I think the two really interesting stories are going to be the Civil War in the North Dakota Republican Party and how that's going to play out, and also this ethics fight. Because if the Ethics Commission decides to make this a legal case, I think they're probably going to win. And this will be the second cycle in a row that the legislature, if it happens and if it goes the way I'm predicting, would be the second cycle in a row that the legislature gets smacked down at the courts. Eventually, you would hope that this is going to catch up to them at the ballot box, although we could spend a whole other episode talking about whether or not the voters even care about any.
Again, people are much more concerned about Fedorchak and Medicaid than they are about Kelly Armstrong and what's happening at the legislature. I mean, I think that's the problem. But so going back to vetoes really quick, do you see him vetoing any other spending sort of things? I mean, I don't know what's still out there, but I know the commerce budget added a bunch of stuff, then they took it out. I would be interested if he ends up line item vetoing any individual funding requests in some of these catch-all budgets.
I don't know about that. I mean, it seems like every government, sometimes you see little ticky-tacky things. They didn't like a certain appropriation or something. So you may see some of that. A couple of other things, I think that what was really contentious, we had that big contentious fight with the Attorney General's office and the Department of Corrections over, basically what North Dakota's philosophy is going to be going forward. Are we going to continue this trend towards criminal justice reform? Are we going to turn back the clock? So one of the things that did get snuck in at the end was some changes to the 20. We had exempted. So right now judges can waive fees for the 24/7 sobriety program, which, basically if it can make you come in and check in. So that was kind of controversial. That got slipped into the Attorney General's budget at the end. That one kind of sticks out of the sore thumb. It makes me wonder what the governor might do with that one.
Yeah, I'd like to see that vetoed.
There was another one too, where the legislature added a bunch of staff for legislative council, which I think is probably needed. Especially, I mean, if we want that branch to have oversight, I think that's really interesting, and I don't mind them staffing up. But one of the things they did is they gave themselves floor 15 of the Capitol, which is kind of unusual. Where we're going to write in law that they get a particular office space, within the Capitol. So I'm kind of wondering, that one stuck out to me from an executive branch perspective. Like, no other state agency gets to just decide. It gets to get written into law, like where their offices are going to be. So, it kind of sounds like the left.
Well, you don't think like the Ledge Council staff is on the chopping block? Because I think
No, I don't know. I don't think the staff is.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows?
But he would have to veto all of them, right? I mean, he couldn't just you can't just cross out 8 and make it 6.
Right, you can't. Well, yeah. So that's the way vetoes work. Is you can only excise.
Yeah.
You can't add, because that's legislating, right? And that was one thing where I'm forgetting, but a veto has been overturned. Like if you just pick certain words to change the meaning, right?
That just happened in Wisconsin.
That becomes legislating and not vetoing.
The governor in Wisconsin vetoed one word in an education funding bill that made the funding formula go on till the end of time. Right. And it increased funding a lot. And that got through because their constitution allowed it. And so he did this little pen, Governor Evers, and I can't remember the details, but it was maybe pushing the line a little bit on what the governor should be able to do.
Because the legislature fundamentally writes the law. So if you do something, you can remove something through the veto. That's the veto power. What you can't do is change the meaning of something.
Right.
Right.
You can't remove the word not.
Right. You shall not you shall not drive over 80 miles an hour, and remove the not, and it's like you shall drive. You can now you're legislating, and you've created a completely different thing. The governor's not allowed to do that. So no, I don't think he can reduce the staff. I'd be very surprised if he vetoed the staff. I think that the legislative council just picking out a floor and then writing it into the law that they get that floor. I have a feeling the executive branch might take a dim view of that.
Yeah.
I always love the interplay between the executive branch and the legislative branch, because it's so fundamental to how government is supposed to work. And I kind of want some jabs back and forth. That's what we were just talking about, where we want. Right. We're checking Congress to stand up to the executive branch a little bit. Even when you're of the same party, you have an institution. The governor has to protect the executive branch as an institution. The legislature has to protect the legislative branch as an institution. I want to see some of this back and forth.
I agree 100%. What's the timeline that the governor has to do these vetoes? Is it 15 days after they adjourn, or
15 days? And I would have to do the math, but I think it has to be maybe early next week, I think is the time. Because it's not from when they passed the bill either. It's from when it got sent over to office. And I mean, that could be different for every bill. So I'd have to go and look in the individual bills, but it's pretty soon they're going to have to. I would say by the end of the week or early next week, we'll have some answers on these.
Well, that'll be fun. I mean,
more stuff.
Kelly Armstrong's the only one still dealing with the legislative session at this point. And they cannot come back to try to override unless they call themselves back in, right?
Yeah, they'd have to call them. They can call themselves back in.
Okay.
That's sort of a weird thing, right? Where and that's one of the reasons why they never want to use up all their legislative days.
Right.
Governor vetoes something big, they need to be able to call themselves back into session to do it.
That and losing 80% of your federal funding might be another reason to do it.
Yeah, that could be very interesting as well. We are going to have Senate Majority Leader David Hogue on the show on Friday. So if there's any big vetoes, we could maybe immediately get the legislative perspective on those vetoes, which usually, legislators don't like being vetoed very much. So that might be.
And if you have any questions you think we should ask Senator Hogue, put them in the comments on social media, or what's the call-in number?
Call them or text them in 701-587-3141. That's the place to put them. All right. So we're going to put a pin in it there. Thank you so much for listening. As always, follow us on all the social media things. Plain Talk ND is our handle on all of them: Facebook, Twitter/X, YouTube, TikTok, all of them. We read all the comments. Really appreciate the people sharing, commenting, liking, all that stuff. That's all great. Appreciate it. Thank you for listening as always, and we'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. Why don't you back off and worry about math a little bit? That was my reaction.
It sounds like you could use a hug.